Okay, let's get going. Hour number 3. I'm going to play a little tiny bit of this video, and I want you to hear this. It's up on the home page under David Icke's picture. You'll see it. And it shows David sitting in a hotel room in Los Angeles. He shouldn't be there. He should have been somewhere else. Here's the story.
I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Los Angeles, looking out of the window to the runway of Los Angeles Airport. I shouldn't be here now. I should be in Australia, in Melbourne, for a multi-city speaking tour. I've been to Australia many times, in fact 10 times since 1997, without any problem with the events, nothing. I was given a visa for this speaking tour by the government in September last year. But the reason that I'm sitting here and not sitting in Australia now should chill to the bone every Australian, because it is testament to what that country, like so many others, has become.
Like so many others, freedom of speech. When we're born on this planet, whether you believe in God or not, whatever your belief system is, we have an essential birthright to speak our mind, to think the thoughts that we want to think. That's what allegedly makes human beings different and great. It's not that way anymore. The formerly United States of America has what's called a Constitution, and it has a Bill of Rights. No other country on the planet has a Bill of Rights like ours, not even remotely like ours. Our First Amendment is considered and was considered by our founding fathers to be the most essential of all human rights, the right to free speech. It no longer exists in many countries, and believe me, I think you all know this, the lid is coming down on it in America. David Icke has gotten up early in the UK to tell us about this outrageous, horrible turn of events. And he is correct. Every Australian resident, every citizen, should be shocked to the bone about what has been done to David. Hello, David. Welcome. Thanks for getting up.
No problem, Jeff.
All right. Let's hear it. How were you notified of this?
Well, it's kind of funny, Jeff, and you and me have been on this road a long time, and we've been talking about the way the world was planned to go for a long time. And, how much more evidence do people need that what we've been talking about is unfolding before
how much more
eyes.
Indeed. Absolutely correct. Yep.
And, people talk about, crazy conspiracy theorists and all this nonsense. A term, of course, was put into widespread use by the CIA, so that's obviously nothing.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
But the great irony, Jeff, and you will have come across it many times, is people say you're talking nonsense, and then they prove you're right. So it's hilarious.
It is hilarious.
You're wrong. It's not an Orwellian state unfolding. What are you talking about? No, you're not coming in. It's just, there's this unbelievable.
I shouldn't laugh. I got to laugh though.
Self-awareness.
Yeah.
But what has happened here, Jeff, is so calculated and so cold, callous, and politicized, because I've been going to Australia to talk now since 1997. I've been 10 times. And, I've got to the airport and I've been questioned and I've been asked to sign something that I won't disrupt Australian society. I couldn't stop laughing when they asked me to sign that. Anyway, this is, 2 or 3 times ago. When I've asked for a visa, it's been a long time before it came, much longer than anyone else, sometimes months. And then, we know a few people in Australia who know a few people, and they've had a word, and suddenly the visas come through. And so this is, been going on for a long time. But the visa this time was awarded last September 2018.
Yeah.
It took a long time, but eventually it came. And not a word has been said since. And not a word. We're just carrying on. My son Jamie, who organizes everything, he's organized the flights and the venues and the hotels and all that expense and all that effort. And we ended up in Los Angeles, sitting in a bar, waiting literally to get on the hotel bus to the airport. And he got a message on his email, and it was from the immigration minister in Australia, a guy called Scott Morrison, who's it's him because you can hear his backbone wobbling. It vibrates, makes quite a noise. And he's telling us in this long kind of statement that the visa's been revoked. This is 4 hours before the plane goes. Now, that's obviously
and 5 months after you got the original in September.
Exactly. It means you can't react. It means you can't get lawyers involved to...
No, they knew that. They knew that.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were stuck in Los Angeles, and we read through this statement, and it was shocking. It's so shocking. We've got lawyers involved now in Sydney, and immigration lawyers have looked at it and said this is absolutely ridiculous. He has said in this statement that you have been here 10 times, listed all the times and all the details, and said there has never been a problem. And he's gone on and on and on about this happened and that happened and that happened, and this, you've never broken the law, you've never done anything wrong, there's never been a problem, but you're not coming in anyway. And the reason, again, is this is what he said in this statement, is the reason that I am a risk to the health, safety, or good order of the Australian community, or a segment of the Australian community. And now we're closer to the real
there
point.
You go. Yep.
It's kind of, again, going back to what I just said, amazing. Because, we're talking about freedom of speech being destroyed quite demonstrably. But something else is happening, and in the same period, which is actually completely connected. And that is that the definition of anti-Semitism is getting wider and wider and wider by the day. We've got this new definition of anti-Semitism, which the British government and so many others are accepting, which is an outrageous expansion of the definition, way beyond discrimination against Jewish people, and way in to what it really is, which is what I call the protection racket. Not a protection racket to protect Jewish people from discrimination, but a protection racket to stop legitimate investigation and criticism of the far, 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 far right regime in Israel. And so we've reached the point now where it is not possible to mention, criticize in any way, shape or form anyone who happens to be Jewish, because then you're an anti-Semite. Of course, this has been played massively on the British Labour Party, which has caved in because it got its phone from David Coleman in Australia. And so this segment of the Australian community is basically two people with some sycophants thrown in. It's a lady called Kate Ashmore, who's a Zionist lawyer in Victoria, who is standing as a Liberal Party candidate, which is the kind of the Conservative Party in Australia. And a guy called Abramovich, who runs as a professional Zionist an organization called the Anti-Defamation Commission, which it's no prizes for guessing where it got its name from, really, given the ADL in America.
Right.
And both of them have taken responsibility or taken the credit, more to the point, for me being banned from Australia. So here we have, again, coming back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago about the fact that they say you can't say that, that's not right, that's not happening, and then they prove you're right by making it happen, by doing it. We have a situation where two professional Zionists, that's what they are really, have pressured a Immigration Minister, David Coleman, to ban me to have the right to speak, but more importantly, from their point of view, to prevent 25 million Australians from having the basic human right to make a choice of what they choose to hear and not hear, because thousands of tickets were already sold for these multi-city events. So this is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a situation where you can't say that certain groups have enormous power compared with their number, but then they go and prove it. So, and this is happening everywhere now, everywhere.
David, you just said something that was very important. You coined a term, or you used the term, professional Zionists. Now, yeah. This is a new term that really, I think, needs to be used more. These people are paid to be Zionist activists, to use all manner of slander, defamation, character assassination. It doesn't matter. They have a green carte blanche go to do anything they want to anyone at any time, and they are not held responsible because they are a member, allegedly, of the most persecuted group on the planet. And professional Zionists, that's a very important term.
Well, what we're looking at is the ability of a tiny group of people. Let's put this into perspective, because I don't want to talk about Jewish people as a whole, because it's not Jewish people as a whole. It's a tiny, tiny number. But the Jewish population of Australia is 0.4%, just slightly above the global population of Jewish people, which is 0.2%. And these people who have pressured the government by unbelievably lying about me and what I'm saying.
That's right.
Are representatives, self-styled, by the way, of at best a fraction of the 0.4%, and yet they have dictated their will to destroy the freedom of 25 million. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, in the sense that, when people say it's the Jews, they're miles off. It's a fraction of the Jewish population. Most of the Jewish population is completely ignorant of what's being done in its name, and is manipulated to allow these zealots to represent them, because they don't realize what these zealots really are and what their agenda really is. But I was interviewed, ironically, about 2 hours before this revoking of my visa came through, by a lovely Jewish Australian journalist called Eve Fisher. And we were kind of having a laugh, because she'd actually read my books, which none of these people have. And we were having a laugh. She was just shaking her head at what had been claimed about me in Australia. So after the interview, she then hears that I'm banned, and she writes a very, very good piece, because she's like a freelance journalist, writes for lots of papers and stuff. And it was from the perspective of a Jewish Australian who had actually read my books, saying the idea he's anti-Jewish is ridiculous. And hold on a minute, what does this say about the freedom of Australians? She passed it across the Murdoch papers in Australia, wouldn't touch it. The Fairfax Group wouldn't touch it. The Guardian wouldn't run it.
Not even the Guardian.
Yeah, wouldn't run it. I mean, the idea of the Guardian's a radical newspaper. I mean, don't start, but I'll be laughing for the rest of the hour. But they wouldn't touch it, and yet they will run, as they have done up to that revoking and after, the most extraordinary lies. There's a Labour candidate in Australia who's going to run in the next election called Josh Burns. Because they're all virtue signaling, that's what they do, who says that I am openly campaigning to have Holocaust denial taught in the schools.
Oh, please.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you basically think of a number and triple it. And what's been happening, Jeff, is because the term anti-Semitism has been so overused, it's lost its power. So now Holocaust denier, because that they think that's
they've drugged that out. I've watched it.
Yeah, they drugged that out because they think that's more that makes you look worse. Interestingly, there's a newspaper, because this is happening to me everywhere now. There's a newspaper in Britain called the Jewish Chronicle, which is edited by a complete hypocrite who actually wrote an article for the London Daily Mail about freedom of speech being destroyed by political correctness. And I wrote to him because of what he supported in the past. And I said, so you're condemning ultra Zionist hate groups. That's what they are, because they set out to hate their targets. Look at the ADL. We're against hate. So what are you doing? Oh, we're trying to get people to hate our targets. That's the other thing as well. Anti-defamation. These organisations call themselves anti-defamation. They go around defaming people. It's classic.
It's all reverse projection. It's classic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this, when I was leaving the airport on the start of this trip, someone sent me an email with a link to this Jewish Chronicle, and it was targeting a member of the UK Labour Party who is Jewish. Because he was criticizing Israel and supporting and criticizing some Jewish MPs, Labour MPs, and they were targeting him because he had once been interviewed on a radio show that used to be broadcast on davidicke.com. So that's where they're getting. But where I'm going with this, it says in this article that David Icke says Jews are reptiles, right? So they're just throwing everything.
They have no restraint, and there's no accountability. No one's going to really hold them accountable. They just lie. That they make it up on the fly. They don't care.
Exactly. And what happens is that the backbones go of politicians. They're trying to virtue signal. Yeah. In fact, someone who we know who has contacts into the Australian government did contact a minister and had a chat, and the minister just really didn't want to go there. They are terrified.
The fear is palpable. It's huge. It's almost like a pandemic virus infecting people. They are afraid.
And then of course the media picks it up. And I was interviewed on a national program.
Let me say something. I've got this up there in headlines. You can see it. David interviewed by 4 or 5 hacks on some Australian morning show or evening chit-chat newsy show. You want to see ambush journalism, or they tried, it didn't work. You want to see ambush journalism, you want to see fraud, you want to see calculated deceit coming out of the mouths of alleged professional journalists. Look at this. You look for David near the top of headlines. It's right there. One of the 3 stories I have up about this today. You can see him and how these vulgar, vile people try to set him up and put words in his mouth and make utterly false accusations and then demand that he respond. It's classic crap is what it is. I've got to watch my language here.
Well, around the world, I mean, CNN, I rest my case. Journalism is absolutely, it's non-existent.
They don't call it programming for nothing. It's programming. They're programming the masses.
But the point is, of course, is just as we have reached this point where freedom of speech is blatantly being targeted. Don't talk to me about the devil's playground in Silicon Valley, or perhaps talk to me about it. But at the same time, even the media are not hiding it anymore. I mean, I do when I come to America, as I've just been recently, I have to watch CNN for 20 minutes just to remind myself of the scale of bias that we have. But the point is that Australia is one of the worst medias. You know, last time I went, I was on their main Channel 9 breakfast show. And they tried an ambush there and regretted it deeply. But they were a couple of morons. They literally morons. They hadn't got they'd never had an original thought in their head. No. And then as you point out, I got interviewed by these three people on Channel 10, a morning show, and it's the same. And then I was on a big radio show out of Melbourne. Just before I came back, and you had basically the same thing. I mean, these are airheads, but see, this is the thing, Jeff. The point of what has happened to me is not me, and it's not what I'm talking about. The point is my right to speak it, and the right of the Australian population to hear it if they so choose. This, as you said in the opening, is absolutely basic freedom of speech. I mean, and basic human freedom. I mean, you know, I've got a mouth. What do you mean I can't use it? What are you doing? Who the hell are you? And there's an important point here, which I've been getting across in these talks, and that's freedom of speech in the sense of the point of delivery. My basic attitude is people should be allowed to say whatever they like. It's a basic human right. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences if you, having delivered your human right, are calling for someone to burn some houses down or beat someone up or have jihadi. I'm not saying that. The point is, when is action taken? And if you take action, which is what is increasingly now the case. This is a case. What happens with algorithms on the Silicon Valley, devil's playground corporations is the same. It's before the point of delivery. Once you censor speech before the point of delivery, as opposed to dealing with the consequences of after the point of delivery, what you're doing is you're giving authority the power to decide what people see and hear. And of course, as we know, as we're seeing every day, once they get their foot in the door, which started out with we must stop people inciting terrorism, that's just the foot in the door. Then the excuses to censor more and more speech before the point of delivery starts. It's a hate speech. What's that? What we decide it is. A fake news. What's that? What we decide it is.
Absolutely subjective. 100% subjective.
Totally. Yeah. And so what's happening is once we've crossed that Rubicon of giving authority the power to censor speech before the point of delivery, then that's the dark and dangerous road that we're now on. And it's blatant. And what is happening is that the greatest, most insidious form of censorship, which is self-censorship, then kicks in because you're frightened of the consequences of upsetting anyone, basically, or saying the wrong thing. And once you have a society, and my God, we're long there, where you have to go through, I will never do it. You have to go through mental gymnastics before you speak about what can I say, what can't I say, how should I say it, how should I not say it.
Right.
Then you're in a big time, an extreme Orwellian tyranny. But where I was just going with this, Jeff, is this: the media in Australia, this brilliant Jewish Australian journalist apart, and the alternative media in Australia apart, talking about the mainstream, we're not picking up on what any journalist should pick up on, which is, hold on a minute, what does this say about Australian society and the freedoms of Australian society? No, they won't go there. They won't go there for a number of reasons. One, they want the checks to keep dropping in the post at the end of the month, so they're not going to upset anybody. But this is, again, the most insidious thing. From my observation now, journalism, what was called journalism, has encompassed and absorbed the whole concept of censorship, and it's become a daily part of its life. It's not something, what do you mean I can't write this? What do you mean you're not running this? Why? Let's have a debate on this. What's going on? None of that. It's knowing where the line is and never crossing it. So the media, you go to CNN, I mean, they're so far across the line, they've disappeared in a cloud of dust over the horizon. But the rest of the media have crossed that line where they just know that they can't cross it. So they never do. So the media, even that which maybe has a half a brain cell on active duty, and I'm being optimistic about how much there is of that now, is self-censoring all the time. And of course, what happens is that if all you have to do, people say a few people can't control the world. Oh, please. Once you control the positions of hire and fire in an organization, and there aren't many positions that control that, you need to control hire and fire. What you then do is you as people go, you hire new people who are the kind of mentality, not very bright. You don't want sharp thinking people. You don't want people with backbone. You don't want people who care about journalism and freedom. So you hire the right people who are not going to be a problem to you. And the old school journalists, as we've seen, who were willing, at least to a point, to go through at least the lip service of being a journalist, they get deleted by basically retirement and going another way.
Right.
But they get replaced by these morons, these airheads, these people who are the absolute personification of what I call the arrogance of ignorance. And this is what's taken the media over. And it's all part of course, the censorship, because they won't defend it.
And they're also, David, as you well know, driven into this alleged career by this longing for celebrity. It's all about celebrity. The culture is a culture of celebrity now, entertainment. It's not a culture of substance. It's not a culture of proactive people. It's a culture of reacting, drooling, Pavlovian masses that are being served up with various audio and video stimuli nonstop at a pace with which they cannot discern, they cannot exact any kind of honest analysis. They can't do it. And when you become afraid to speak about a subject, you know better than anyone, you become afraid to think about it. You don't even go there. So this is mind control and thought control, not just a question of crushing freedom of speech. Think about it in the bigger picture, please.
That's exactly right. And of course, when you get to the increasing extremes of the media, it's not even being frightened to go there. It's being frightened not to go there in terms of what you're putting there to promote. And I'm talking about people like Don Lemon and Kumo on CNN. Right. And I watch them, we've been in journalism a long, long time. Okay, we remember when journalism was not perfect, but it was very different to what it is now. Yeah. And when I look at my days as a journalist, well, I'm still a journalist, I just don't have an editor now. But when I look at my days in the mainstream media, even at the BBC, if Don Lemon and Kumo on CNN presented a show as they do, I mean, they wouldn't have made the end titles.
No.
They'd have been way out. What are you doing? You can't do that.
Right.
You can't be so partisan, so biased. You can't do that. But that's where we've got to now.
It's beyond bias, David. There literally is now, among a certain black news people, clear anti-white, anti-European racist talk and dialogue and dogma, which is not being called on the carpet. It is being absolutely given a green light pass. They don't even talk about this. Lemon's mouth. When he runs his mouth, it makes me sick. And he gets away with it. He gets away with it. If you, for example, had been going to Australia to conduct a speaking tour on how outrageously poor the Australian government is, you'd be over there talking right now. Or if you were going over there to talk about the threat that the communist Chinese pose, right, to Australia, you'd be over there talking about. You can criticize anything or anyone on the planet or any group, but you cannot criticize organized Zionism, or they will come after you. Big time. That's what happens.
Well, that's been my experience for a very long time. And the closer that I get, and I'm getting seriously close now, as people are going to see by the end of this year, before the end of this year, to how this all works and where this is all going and what the background is, the more that they come after me. And so it's just confirmation that I'm on the right angle. And I tell you what, by the end of the year, they'll have to take to their beds, I promise you, because I am not going to bow to this, because once you do, then the die is cast, and all you can do from then on is keep walking backwards. And eventually you feel something against your back, and it's a wall. And at that point, there is no freedom left. And
None.
No. This is a really important theme that we've been talking about, of what's been predicted and what is now happening. And they're saying, it's a conspiracy theory, when actually you said it in the 90s and it's now happening, which is what happened with my books in the 90s. They're now being read on the television news. And one way that it's expressing itself is through people like Ocasio-Cortez, who is the natural outgrowth, the natural consequence of what's been happening in the colleges and universities for years and years now, which is this incessant indoctrination of a mind perceptual program, where I can't think of a better phrase to describe Ocasio-Cortez and what she represents than the arrogance of ignorance. And so now this programming of what's become known as progressive, which is actually fascistic, is now reached the point where it's entering politics. And this is why she's been given all this publicity, even though she's just become a congresswoman.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Why she's getting all this front. Because what are we actually seeing, Jeff? We've been pointing out that the global warming hoax is for one reason, overwhelmingly, and that is to justify, through a manufactured excuse, the transformation of human society into a I say fascistic, and fascistic is right because they're using the techniques of fascism, but really it's Marxism, because this is what's happening, I would suggest.
Correct. Agreed. Yeah.
Marxism. See, first of all, Karl Marx was the banker's boy. He was just a front man for him. The idea that he was representing the working classes, I mean, do me a favor, But anyway, what was Marxism? It was the transformation of society by playing off different factions of society off against each other in what they call the class struggle and all that stuff, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But that point, you see, in the communistic Marxist transformation of society, because it was a class struggle, you had a division between those, you call them the poor, and the rich. There was a struggle between the two. We've moved beyond that now on purpose. So the class struggle of Marxism has now been replaced by the self-identity struggle. Now, because it's a self-identity struggle, this is why they're creating all these minutiae of groups and subgroups with certain identities, and they're playing them off against each other. So, transgender is now destroying women's sport by people in male bodies taking part in women's sporting events. I mean, if people aren't going to call that out, they're not going to call anything out. It's so ludicrous.
You got it. Yeah.
The point is, however, that because it's a struggle, a Marxist struggle manufactured between self-identity groups, the poor and oppressed and the billionaires are no longer in that division. This is why the so-called progressive left, if only it was, is now on the same side over and over again with tech billionaire companies and billionaire
they call it big tech now,
etc. Yeah. It's because as long as the billionaire, at least through lip service, identifies with the self-identity group, the division of rich and poor, oppressed and oppressor disappears. So you have a man in the form of George Soros, who, by the way, is not Jewish, he's Chinese. I've decided to call him Chinese now, so that I can overcome the obvious response. So this Chinese man, George Soros, who has been exposed in leaked documents and emails, and his tens and tens of billions of dollars that he funnels through this Open Society Foundation network, which operates in 100 countries and is manipulating societies all over the world, that is massively involved in the manipulation of mass movements of people from one area of the world to the other. Soros has bought the left. It's bought the Democratic Party, and it owns it. But the Democratic Party and the so-called progressive left, we're radical, we're anti-establishment. Yeah, okay, if only.
If only.
Now is quite at peace with being in bed with a billionaire Chinese financier who has said that he doesn't basically care about the social consequences of what he does. He's only there to make money. So that's where we've gone. And it's extraordinary, this inversion that's happened, where the old liberal left that I remember and I grew up with, the truly liberal left that cared about freedom of speech and cared about taking on the billionaire imposers of their will on society. That's all gone. It's been replaced by this fake progressive left, which increasingly is much further to the right, if you use the political spectrum, than what they call the right. So there's been this massive shift, and it's created not only what we've been talking about, it's fused so many things into the one-party state. So there are things that the progressive left and the so-called right, in the form of the neocons in America, actually agree on. So they agree on the continuation of invading countries and removing the regimes they want to remove. And they agree on the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. There's a certain right in politics that absolutely is standing up for it. But there's this group called neocons. That network is also in favor of destroying freedom of speech. They are fusing together the progressive left that is extreme and
very important point
neocons,
you're making.
The neocons, they're actually one unit. This is the point. They're one unit.
We've this whole label game, David, has completely gone crazy. They're playing semantic games now with people's minds constantly. The stereotypical images now that they're forcing down people's psychological minds through the mass media are astonishing. They're all twisted. They're corrupted. And you mentioned Marx. Here's a funny quote from Marx. This is a quote from Karl Marx. It's short. Anyone who knows anything of history knows that great social changes are impossible without feminine upheaval. Social progress can be measured exactly by the social position of the fair sex, the ugly ones included. Karl Marx.
Yeah, well, this is the thing again, because it's all Orwellian inversion.
Yes,
whereby people talk about the need for inclusion, and they express that by excluding groups they want to marginalize. So once you get people in groups and identified as groups, and not as individuals, then you have infinite capacity for divide and rule.
Total
and
control.
Not only promoting one group, you can't say anything about them, but also demonizing another group. Yeah. And see, the way I look at the world, and for me, what freedom should be about, is to look at individual behavior, irrespective of its religious background, its racial background, its income bracket background. What is the behavior? Look at individuals. Look at what they do. Look at what they say. Look at what they stand for and how they express their lives. And don't look at their skin. Don't look at their cultural background. Don't look at their income bracket. Look at them. But what happens, of course, with the self-identity Marxist scam is that you don't do that. You judge everyone by their color, their religion, their background that is part of that self-identity, which means now you can't say anything about certain groups, otherwise you're a racist or a bigot or an anti-Semite, which of course, as we know, means anti-Arab if you break down what Semite means. And on the other side, one group, which is the white race now, is constantly targeted. And okay, so white supremacy. Are some people privileged because they're white? Yes. And in some other countries, in many other countries, are some people privileged because they're not white? Yes. But is the guy on Skid Row in Los Angeles today, where typhus is breaking out, is he or she expressing white privilege? Mm-hmm. It's insanity.
Mm-hmm. It is.
What you have in the homeless, gathering homeless communities around the world are white people, black people, Hispanic people in trouble, right? In trouble. And that should be the criteria of how we look at it. So what can we do to help these people get out of the street, get off the street? But no, it's not that. It's, oh yeah, well, it's terrible what's happening to you, but no, you're white, so it's not the same. And what are we looking at? Again, we come back to it, Orwellian inversion. We're looking at reverse racism. I've never met an anti-racist yet, a vehemently activist anti-racist, who wasn't a racist, who wasn't obsessed with race, who didn't judge people and identify people by their race. That is classic racism. When I see someone, I see consciousness having an experience. The vehicle is just the vehicle for the consciousness to have the experience. I don't see race. And in the inversion, they call me racist because of the fact that I challenge the extremes of the far right regime in Israel. But this is what happens. And of course, once they target you like this, it's very simple. They say to you, have you stopped beating your wife yet?
That's exactly the trick. That's
what you're facing whenever you go on the media.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what that Australian crew did to you this morning. And you can watch it again. Just find David near the top of headlines at Rense, and you'll see his appearance on that program. I admire you for going on there. I don't know why you bothered, but
what I do, Jeff, is I make this judgment when I go onto programs like that, and I've had the experience of this for nearly 30 years of doing this. You go on, you know you're going to talk to idiots. I mean, you're well aware of that. You know they're going to come at you from the system's point of view because their backbones wouldn't allow anything else.
Nope.
You know that many in the audience are going to be from the same mentality. Otherwise, pretty much they wouldn't be watching that show. But you also know that within the audience watching are people who do have a mind of their own, who do have discernment, who do have the ability to hear what you're saying.
Right.
And so I do it for them. And
Sure.
if I can go on a program and get, abused by morons like that, but significant numbers of people watching hear me and think, hold on a minute, I'm seeing what he's saying here, then it's worth it. Because, after 30 years of taking constant abuse, it goes in one ear and out the other to me. And I do know, Jeff, from the aftermath of this. But it has alerted a lot of people who weren't into my stuff at all to the fact that Australian society has reached a point of deleting freedom, which is very, very worrying. There's been quite a few people who've said, well, I didn't know about this guy before, but I'm going to look at what he's saying now, because if this is happening, well, obviously he's saying something right. You get more people. You take the abuse. It's basically like Muhammad Ali, against George Foreman. You take the
rope-a-dope. Yeah.
But you take the punches, but you can also throw some and throw the decisive ones. And you bring more and more people into this awareness. And so I talk to these people because of that, not because I think I'm going to get a fair deal. That'll be the day.
Here's another great quote, David. You've seen this 100 times, I'm sure. Some of you out there don't. It's a final warning from George Orwell. It's only about a minute long. It's very good. It's very powerful, and there's a lot of truth to it. Here we go.
In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. We shall abolish the orgasm. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
So there you go. It does depend on all of us, all of us, to make this not happen. We've got to become aware of it. We've got to stand up and oppose it. Go ahead, David.
Well, people should ask the question, how did Orwell know? They should ask the question, how did Aldous Huxley know with Brave New World in 1932? How did a guy I quote at length in one of my books, a Rockefeller Insider, know what was happening now, what was going to happen now, in fine detail in 1969? Because there's two worlds. We live in two worlds. There's the one that we live in and think we live in, and that has a certain level of awareness and a certain level of knowledge. And there's another world that is manipulating this one, which has a much greater level of knowledge, a much longer projection of its agenda. And if you can access that world, then you can predict the future. And I started accessing that world a long time ago, and it's unfolding. It's basically just passing its world into our world. And this is how, because of this projected agenda that's coming from a very different level of awareness, a different level of knowledge, that's why people who can access it can produce 1984 and Brave New World and be so accurate. The world that we're living in is not changing by accident, but by long-term planned design. And we need to intervene now.
Indeed. David, thank you. Talk soon. Keep it up.
Pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. Good night. David Icke. And that piece is in headlines. David Icke challenges Australian News Channel 10 program, something like that. Go look at it. Go listen to it. Watch the ambush. What a disgrace to the alleged profession that we work in and apply ourselves so completely to. They just make a mockery of it. All right. Thanks to David Icke, there are millions upon millions of people who have a very good idea now of the level of treachery and deceit and manipulation that is being used against us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All right. Back with you tomorrow night. Take care.